Hello, and welcome back to Writer's Ramble. I'm Michael,
And I'm Deanna.
and today we're going to be talking about one of my favorite video games of all time, or at least the story in it, Shadow of the Colossus, as per one of our commenters' suggestions. Um,
So thank you for that. And
yeah.
it's perfect timing because you finished the game. Well, it was a little while ago, but within the last year or so, I think, is when you played it. And you really enjoyed it. And I didn't play it, guys, but I watched. and so,
Perfect timing within a year or two.
yeah. And so we thought it was kind of funny that someone did suggest that because that's right up your alley.
Oh,
And
yeah.
while we're not like a gaming channel, but we are writers and we still like to discuss like the plot and characters and like the writing of the story that you may find in video games. So that's what we're going to be talking about today.
We're open to discussing any and all mediums so long as it has a story and
Mm-hmm.
writing involved. Admittedly, Shadow of the Colossus doesn't have a lot in terms of writing. It's a very dialogue light game. However, that's not to say that there isn't any storytelling, and environmental storytelling is just as much
Mm-hmm.
storytelling as anything else.
Yeah, and I think that's a good point because it leaves a lot of intrigue.
Hmm.
And like as a writer and not playing the game in this case, I was very intrigued like as I watched you play it because there was just a lot of mystery of like what happened.
And yeah, that's kind of the main draw to Shadow of the Colossus, I feel like, is that mystery and that atmosphere. I'd say that that is what the game does best, just generally speaking, is you start the game with like an intro cutscene where you see a guy on a horseback and he's got like this what looks like a body behind him, and then you see him like climbing a mountain and then like going through this ancient doorway and then crossing this really ancient looking bridge that just like looks significant, and then enters this big temple which is like truly like the biggest landmark in a wide area around it. It's kind of in the center of everything, and so you just like feel like it's all very important, but you really don't have any idea of what's going on as of yet. Honestly, like, you don't really know what's going on even once you've beaten it, unless you like look into lore stuff. You might piece it together, but there's a lot of things that it doesn't straight up tell you. For instance,
Well, hang
the
on. I just want to say just a fair spoiler warning for anyone that maybe wants to
yeah.
play it but hasn't yet. I feel like that's kind of obvious, but I still want to throw it out there just in case. But go on.
Spoiler warning for a 20-plus-year-old cult classic game. Fair point. It is a very interesting story, and it does have a plot twist at the end. It really is best if you play it for yourself, but I imagine a lot of people, especially if you clicked on this, already have played
Mm-hmm.
it, one of the two versions. I know that this may seem blasphemous, but I have not played the original on the like PS2, I believe.
Fake fan.
I'm sorry. And I know that some people have issue with the remake, not many, but few, about how the Blue Point Studios, how they change certain things artistically, because they hold the original in such high regard that they don't like any sort of creative liberties being taken. But you kind of can't help but take creative liberties when you're jumping from PS2 graphics to like PS4 graphics.
Mm-hmm.
It's just you're gonna have to like make up some details in there, you
Mm-hmm.
know. And I genuinely find the remake to be one of the most beautiful games I've ever played. Um, just for its stunning scenery. There's something about the game, for me at least, that really feels nice. I don't even know how to
Mm-hmm.
describe it really. It's been discussed a lot on YouTube and video essays and whatnot, but the atmosphere in the game and the structure of it as a game is wildly compelling in that it is very, very, very bare by design.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
It's like a very feels like the world is very open. I know I don't quite mean open world, but if we're talking about video game terminology, which I don't want to dive in too much because we're just talking about like the plot and the characters mostly, but I do think that the overall like vibe, like the aesthetics, I don't know, it does elicit a particular feeling. It's like you feel alone,
Uh-huh.
but you also feel weirdly calm, or like I
Yeah.
felt that way when I
Yeah.
watched you play it. It was like very beautiful, like you said,
Mm-hmm.
very open, a lot of empty like fields, but you also, it seemed like it was probably fun to like explore. And I feel like, I don't know, as I was watching it, I was getting a lot of, I feel like it's, what's the right word? I don't know, it got my creative juices flowing. Like it
Mm-hmm.
just made me kind of wonder like what was going on in this world. And I mean, I already said that, but it just felt mysterious,
Yeah.
and it kind of made me want to almost write a story that elicits like a similar vibe.
Yeah, no, honestly, I mean, the same thing has happened for me. Um, so, what I'll say about it in terms of design, and I'm only getting into this as much as I am because the atmosphere is heavily affected by the game world, and the atmosphere ties in very heavily to the story because you wouldn't really get the full experience without understanding just how different this game is than your typical game and how it feels to exist in this world. Because if I were to just tell you the story, and I can just like tell you it all right now, you go the not you, well you as the player, but the character Wander goes to a place called the Forbidden Lands, kills 16 stone giants called Colossi.
And they're cute, and I feel bad for them. They were just minding their own business.
all in an effort to bring his girlfriend, sister, woman,
Yeah,
who he cares about.
it's never explained like who she is. So that's why you mentioned it could be a sister, it could be a girlfriend, could be a cousin. Like who knows?
Right,
Like,
and so he's trying to bring her back from the dead, and he was told he can do that by killing the colossi. He does that, and then she does come back to life, but he is also possessed by the spirit of an evil, or arguably evil god called Dorman, who was locked away there.
because he was dormant.
Yeah, I don't know if that was intentional, because it was originally a Japanese developed game, so could just be like a translation thing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so that's the whole story. I just told you all of it.
But like with each colossi that you kill, it's like interesting because like Wander, he like with each one that dies, there's like these like spindly black like
Tendrils.
yeah that
Yeah,
like shoot out and like get you or
yeah, they get
Wanderer.
yeah.
And it like each time, and you mentioned this, and I thought it was really a cool detail, but like each time he sort of like wakes up again and continues on to find other colossi. Like you can notice that he's like getting physically more like, I don't want to say weaker, but he looks like more sickly.
Yeah, it's interesting because the camera is so pulled back, you don't typically really like notice it, and it's also a very subtle change over time. But he starts the game almost redheaded, or at the very least a very bright brunette, and that actually changes by very subtle shades after every Colossus you kill, and you'll also see toward the end of the game that his skin's getting paler, and
It's like more ashen
you can
looking.
see like black tendril sort of things in his veins. Like he's looking
Pretty
a little
tough.
tough. Yeah, he's looking a little rough.
But I think
Um,
that's like kind of like a cool detail because it's
mhm.
showing how like with each one that he kills, how it's like affecting him and like how he's being slowly like taken over. And
Yeah, by Dorman.
mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I did kind of skip over the detail, but if you haven't pieced it together, there's like 16 separated parts of Dorman's soul inside the Colossi, which is why he had to kill them. And then upon Dorman's release, he brought the woman, her name is Mono, I believe, back to life per Wander's request. He just didn't know about the little caveat where he would become the vessel for a demon.
And that's honestly tragic. Like as I was
Yeah.
watching, like because again I didn't play it, but when I like watched the ending like unfold, I was like horrified, and I was like no.
Yeah.
And it's like. And I think this game is a great example to use for like storytelling and it really has like the impacting ending, at least for me when I watched it.
Oh yeah,
Because,
no, it's a really good like moment. In a game that's like sort of devoid of big moments aside from the boss battles, like the story doesn't really progress from the moment you start playing until you get to the very end.
yeah.
Because the status quo doesn't really change until that point.
It's
It
like,
does change subtly over time, as we said, with like his physical condition, but that's something you could honestly not even notice.
I feel like it's a pretty simple story,
Yeah, yeah, it's very simple.
but still gives you feels,
Mm-hmm.
still makes you feel bad for, what his ending is like. And even
Mm-hmm.
though he does succeed in saving her, whoever
He
she
loses
is,
himself in the process.
yeah, he like
Yeah.
sacrificed himself basically. Not that he was aware that he would be like basically possessed, but
Yeah. There's a couple other things of note story wise. There's a very, very brief and small and honestly relatively unimportant subplot about these other guys who are from the same village as Wander who find out where he went and what he's up to, and they come to stop you at the end when you get taken over by Dorman. And yeah, they kind of sort of kill you. The ending is a little odd because then they kill you, or you might assume that they do because they stab you several times.
they
Um,
usually will do it.
usually. And you'd think that like wanders beyond saving after all of that, but like then you get reborn as a baby, and I really don't understand
I
what the point of that was. There's fan theories, and some people say that he's like the progenitor of a race of horned children who then are like persecuted in Team Eco's previous game called Eco, which that's their headcanon that they fit together. You are reborn as a horned baby. You can make that connection, but as for like objective fact stuff, I don't know. I don't really know for positive anything.
So, like, I would say if you're a writer that likes to write kind of like ambiguous endings, like, I feel like you could take some notes from this game because I feel like there's a lot of that in this game, and also just like attention to detail.
Yeah. One thing that Team Eco was famous for when they created Eco was a design philosophy, which was instead of design by addition, instead of adding more things, instead of making the game more mechanically complex, they chose a philosophy of design by subtraction. So they made a whole bunch of mechanics, figured out what they liked best, what worked best, and just cut literally everything else out and focused only on the things that they thought were best about it, and it worked really well for them. And I think that philosophy transferred over to Shadow of the Colossus because, like you said, it's an open world game, ostensibly. It is wide, it is open, you can go pretty far in just about any direction, and there is a minimal amount of exploring you can do in the open world. There are these little lizards you can get, which will you can shoot them with an arrow, and they will increase your stamina if you collect the tail that falls off.
If you're a monster.
And I am. Um, and in the remake, there's like 76 coins, which lead you to a secret, but that was added by the remake's developers, and you can kind of count that as not part of the initial vision for the game. I liked that quest, but I can see why some people would be like, well, they're just gamifying it at this point, even though it is a video game. But that's the thing I think that people kind of like about it is it's a video game that is very not video gamey. There's like three whole mechanics in the whole game, and there's no enemies aside from the bosses, and there's nothing to really do aside from killing the bosses. There's this big open area, and it's almost wholly devoid of anything. And frankly, as a gamer, and as someone who appreciates atmosphere and loneliness, being an introvert, I guess, it was so fascinating to me, and it made me feel nice because there's a pressure when you're playing games to do all the stuff. There's so much stuff for you to do in any given game, and I love how focused this one was. But it could have been more focused, you know, it could have been like a hallway, it could have just like been a mission select structure, it could have been any of those things, but they chose to have an open world because the vibes, it has immaculate vibes.
You know, you're also a minimalist.
I'm also a minimalist, so I am very biased when it comes to this game. But I mean, you felt it too when you were watching me. It has immaculate vibes. It's one of the few games that I've ever played that I've just kind of wanted to sit back and look at things, which makes me sound like I would be no fun playing a game with, because I can't like appreciate it. I really feel like I do appreciate art styles and environments. I really try to anyway, but I get distracted, you know, by all the stuff. But
You
in
get
this
distracted.
game, I get distracted by things which will progress things.
Oh.
I don't get distracted by looking at pretty things like
I
you do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But we're not here to talk about that.
And so without all those distractions, I could really appreciate just the beauty of the game. And it is, like I said before, one of the best looking games I've ever played. It also is very important that the space exists there because it's part of the story. Because while there isn't much story to go around during the general play of the game, like I said, you just go from one to the next to the next. You have time to reflect on what you're doing when you're riding from one boss to the other, because the game very clearly, very intentionally has you kill the boss. It knocks you out with the tendrils, and then you awake back in the temple that's at the center of the map. And then, you know, rinse and repeat. But you always start back at the center of the map so that you have to ride out to the next boss. Like, let's say that there's a boss in like one corner of the map, and then the next one you are supposed to fight is pretty much right next to them in that same area of the map. The game forces you to go back to the middle, so you got to ride back out. Like you said, you do start feeling bad if you didn't already initially after like the first one for the Colossi, because the thing is, typically speaking, when you just ride up to them, they're not hostile, they're not attacking you.
Yeah, they're like, and it doesn't help that they're also like kind of cute in a way.
Yeah.
Like, a lot of them seem like they kind of represent different animals. I especially felt bad for the ones that were like cats, because I'm a cat person, and like there's one in particular that like
That one looks kind of like a lion, or like a. I feel like the one you're talking about looks kind of like a bull or something, but
I don't know. Some of them it's hard to know like what animal exactly they are. It's kind of ambiguous.
yeah,
in the
they're
design.
stone creatures that are vaguely resembling animals.
Yeah. But there's one in particular that like my heart always broke for it, because like I think you scare it with fire and it tries to like bat you away, and I was like, oh poor baby, leave him alone.
Yeah. One thing I'd like mechanically about the game, and I'll breeze over this because that's not what we're here to talk about, but just the bosses aren't bosses in like the Dark Souls fashion where they're just very hard or very mechanically complex in how they attack you. Again, typically speaking, they're not even attacking you. Even when you're attacking them, half of the time they're not attacking you. Some of them could kill you, and some of them have attacks, but there are certain ones that just like they don't really have any means of self-defense, and you're just there slaughtering them. You feel justified in doing so because you're like, well, my girlfriend, you know? I gotta save her.
I wouldn't have. Like, the whole time I was watching you, I was like, oh, these poor defenseless babies. They're just chilling, enjoying their day, and then this little asshole comes along and starts hacking away.
I mean,
and
keep in mind that it's holding the dismembered soul of a dead god.
Which is actually another thing I wanted to talk about, because I do find that very interesting, because like when you hear that, that sounds like they would be ominous and like, you know, forced to be stopped.
Yeah.
Until like, I don't know, the idea that what you do unleash is actually a bad thing. I think.
Well, so I called him a demon earlier. I feel like the thing is, I also said arguably evil because he does bring Mono back to life, and when he's done possessing you, you're not even really dead. You turn into a baby, a cursed baby, but a baby nonetheless. Like, he gave you a second chance at life. he was imprisoned for a reason, and they're the forbidden lands for a reason, but you kind of can't help but wonder, like, well, is he that bad? Like, he did a couple of good things. I can see why he might be bad, because you don't even know what kind of atrocities he committed when he was free, you
Yeah,
know?
which I guess is like what like a point I wanted to make like for other writers. You know, if you want to make like a really interesting, I guess you'd call him an antagonist in this case or whatever it is, like you know, rather
Yeah.
than just writing like really black and white, you know, good versus bad characters, this is like such a mixed bag, I feel like, and
Yeah.
it's just
Yeah.
but yeah, it just makes things more interesting, and I would so much rather read a story where you have very ambiguous characters like this versus, you know, the very clear black and
Mm-hmm.
white good versus evil.
You know, in terms of villains, you can have morally gray villains, you can have anti-heroes, you can have anti-villains, which is a lot rarer, but is also a thing. I'd say whatever you do go for, really go for it. Don't make a morally gray villain who does something so incredibly heinous that that's the only reason that people dislike them. Like, you should probably give them a fair point, but then don't have them kick a baby just to emphasize that they're still evil, you know, which is
Mm-hmm.
something that a lot of writers do. And you know what? I'll also say, like, people really appreciate, like, sympathetic villains. If you're going for an all-out villain with no redeeming qualities, I say also swing for the fences for that, because people also really appreciate that. You gotta do one or the other. Meeting in the middle doesn't make for a good villain. You can either have Jack Horner, or you can have like Thanos, where some people genuinely think he kind of had a point. In this instance, it's very helpful that Dorman is so ambiguous. You don't know anything about him at all, practically, aside from the fact that he's been telling you what to do this whole time, and that he possessed you at the end, but then also brought your girlfriend back to life. So it's like, what do I believe here? You know, that's kind of the real reason why he seems morally gray, is because you just don't know fuck all about him. You know. To kind of circle back, because I never quite got to make this point, I really like the boss fights themselves, because they're moments of spectacle in an otherwise dead world. It's either like 0 or 100 in this game. But it's like really cool 100. There's like, you know, really cool music and like choirs, and really cool like shots of you like flying on the wings of this flying Colossus and stabbing it, or you know, climbing up its body, you know, inch by inch, and stuff like that. Or like you're underwater and you're holding on for dear life as you're running out of breath and stamina as it's like diving up and under the water, stuff like that. It's really cool, really interesting spectacle, and all of the bosses sort of play as puzzles, because you have to find, they only have certain weak spots, and you can only attack them at certain moments, otherwise you get shaken off, because you can't attack and also grip onto them at the same time. You have to do one or the other, and so it makes for an interesting way of making your way through the boss fight. One of my favorite ones is this gigantic four-legged colossi, or colossus rather, that it has weak points on the bottom of its feet, and you eventually figure that out if you look at it closely enough. And then, so as it's picking its foot up, you shoot it in the foot, and you got to get like 2 of those, and then it like falls onto its back, and then that's the only time when you can find places you can climb onto it. And it's just really interesting. I like the way that the game is designed a whole lot. But that's more gameplay. I just appreciate it.
But I'll say, like, you know, if we're talking about advice for writers in this case, you know, you mentioned that either things are pretty calm, or like it swings between, you know, being kind of more calm and peaceful, or a lot of quiet contemplation versus, you know, like actually fighting the, you know, Colossus, or, you know, very spectacular things that are going on. But if we're looking at like what to aim for when you're writing, I do think it is good to have moments that are a little bit calmer sometimes, like for your characters. And this could be seen as maybe something lighthearted happens if you are writing a very angsty, gloomy story. It is good to have a break to kind of break up that tension, but don't have it be so long where like readers are gonna get like uninterested or something. But I would say it during those like kind of like downtime moments, you can also make sure to keep the reader's interest by maybe proposing a question of some kind or a mystery that's gonna keep them kind of wondering what's gonna happen.
Intrigue.
Yeah, something that'll intrigue them and wonder what's gonna happen next, because you don't want your readers to get to a point where it's so quiet and so calm to the point where they're like, well, I have no interest in continuing, the story could just end here for all I care.
Right.
Like, you want to keep something that keeps them wondering, which I feel like the game still, accomplishes, because, you have that goal of, like, killing each Colossus, but also...
Yeah, you always have the next Colossus. You always have, like, contemplation you can do on, like, your own actions, killing them, and then you have that goal from beginning to end to bring her back to life.
Well, what I was also going to say is that, like, with each one you kill, Wanderer looks worse, which for me would communicate that something not so great is happening here, and it's kind of like, is it good that he's doing this? It kind of makes you wonder if the motives are good after all, or if the ending goal is going to be what you want it to be, or if you're being deceived. And you could communicate kind of a similar thing, like in your storytelling, where maybe the main character is like maybe noticing some negatives. If they have a goal that they're wanting to achieve, is like maybe something else standing in their way? Is there going to be some negative repercussions? Like, you can kind of like sprinkle breadcrumbs.
Yeah, it's honestly really good, especially for how little concrete plot developments there are in the game in creating that intrigue. First of all, if you're playing the game, you might just be interested in like, ooh, what's the next boss going to be like? If you are feeling bad for them, you can, sort of be like, am I the good guy? You might see Wander and be like, am I the good guy? You might be like wondering like what's happening to him, and so you continue to see what happens. And of course, you always want to save Mono. Granted, like, it doesn't really show you what kind of relationship they have, so that's not the best motivator. That's kind of more of a story motivation than like a personal player motivation. But she's like the catalyst for all of it, and that just kind of doesn't change. So I think that's fine, especially since it's a relatively short game, so it doesn't need to try to regain your attention halfway through with something else that happens. It's perfectly fine with having as many bosses as it has and just kind of keeping things the same until the very end. But I would also say that because of how little dialogue there is, because of how little there is in terms of plot on a moment-to-moment basis, I'd argue that this kind of story isn't something you could do very well, or at the very least in this exact same way in like a written format. It would be bordering on really boring a lot of the time if you didn't like have a very persistent internal monologue or something, I think, to kind of keep there being something to think about.
Yeah, I do think you would need a pretty strong like internal monologue, like you said. Have the character wondering, if he's doing the right thing, if his plan is going to work, and or maybe even just having memories or flashbacks of maybe like what was going on with his relationship with this woman. Like, I would be interested in that personally.
Yeah, you could do sort of like a Breath of the Wild thing where
another video game.
Well, it's like a good example of a video game that does this sort of more traditional story better, because Zelda's egging you on in Breath of the Wild to defeat Ganon. But, I mean, gamers know who Zelda is, but you don't really know this Zelda because they're different from game to game. And you don't know what her relationship to Link is and why she wants him to save her necessarily, but you learn that over time when you collect memories, because he has amnesia, which is a trope that you should probably avoid more than embrace, but if you're going to have it, I think that was a pretty good way to do it in that game.
It's like, so we're not saying you should write a story about amnesia, but if you can do it well, go for it. Yeah,
I'd argue that Shadow of the Colossus is a story that is one of the rare ones that I would argue works best and almost exclusively in a video game format. But that doesn't mean that it doesn't have merit as a story, because it's very critically acclaimed, and it really relies on the player agency to make you ask those questions about what you're doing, because you can't just watch this like a movie, you can't just read this like a book. You are Wander, you're killing all these things, live with your actions, you know what I mean? And if you don't want to kill the Colossi, too bad, you can't progress the story without doing so. So it really makes you enter his shoes, and really get invested, like, about the mystery, about what's going to happen to him, about, is Dorman even going to resurrect Mono at the end, or is this all a big trick? It works really well, and you could make a story about this, but
just know how to execute it properly.
you'd have to execute it very well. And yeah, I just think out of all the video games that there are, most of them, the ones with the best stories lean in a cinematic direction, which just kind of emulates classic movies. It has cutscenes, it has voice acting, lots of dialogue, really good character models that can express things really well. It's basically a movie, especially in this day and age where we have the technology to do that. Like Spider-Man, PS4, God of War, the new ones, all very basically just movies that you can play.
Metal Gear Solid 4.
Oh gosh, don't even get me started on that.
Yeah, that would be an entirely different video if we ever did cover that, but go on.
But Shadow of the Colossus utilizes the player relationship with the character of Wander in a way that you just really couldn't do in any other format, which I appreciate it for. And it's still a very good story. And also, toward the end of the game, when you're going to fight the last Colossus, your horse sacrifices herself for you, and it's the saddest thing ever. And I would have just regretted not mentioning that in the story analysis, because it's a brief moment, and she actually does survive it. You find out later. Yeah, but she's limping. But in the moment, the thing is, you don't realize how much you've come to rely on this horse as you've been going along, because it would just be really, really difficult to cross through the Forbidden Lands without her, because there's just such vast distances. It's meant to be done on horseback. So you also develop a close relationship, an unspoken relationship with this horse, because Wander doesn't really talk as a character. The horse obviously doesn't talk.
It's not like BoJack.
No. But she's so useful in the game, and then also she's like, a horse, which humans have, like, we're predisposed to liking them,
Yeah, kind of like dogs.
All girls have their, like, horse girl phase. Guys appreciate horses, like cowboys and stuff, because of how useful they are.
Did you see the Barbie movie?
Exactly. Aside from dogs, they're probably like man's best friend. They probably should be, because they're more useful than dogs, but
so don't say that to John Wick.
Dogs make for better personal companionship, to be fair.
Here's another thing I want to quick throw out there. Like, if you want to, like, if you're a writer and want to make your readers feel like shit, give the main character like a pet, or like an animal companion, and hurt them. Like, they'll hate you for that, and
be careful, because they might hate you a little too much.
Yeah, that is true, but it was very effective in John Wick. If you just really want to just punch your readers in the gut, you know what to do.
I mean, there are people I know who wouldn't want to watch something because it's like, well, does the dog die? It's like,
yeah, you have to be careful.
Yeah, which is probably why they had Aggro is the name of the horse, survive.
Yeah, because otherwise it might be too much.
Mm-hmm. But until from the moment that she falls into a ravine as she's crossing a bridge that crumbles out from underneath her, from the moment she falls into that ravine to the post credits where you see the cutscene where you're a little horned baby, you don't realize that she survived because that's when she comes back. So for the longest time, you're thinking that you lost your horse. You're thinking that the character you played as this whole time is dead. Um, you don't even know until like post credits, I think, that Mono actually does come back to life.
So it's like
So
it was
like
all for nothing.
so like credits start rolling and you are just sitting there thinking this is like the worst tragedy imaginable, and it still kind of is because Wander can't be with Mono. He's a baby now. Um, but it's not as bad as it seems before the credits start rolling.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, just like a really unique game with, again, impeccable vibes.
I just really want to know just what happened in those forbidden lands before. Like that's what I want to
Well, they're
know.
forbidden because that's where they exiled Dorman's soul.
I know, but there's like a whole story there that I just really want to like I'd read it.
Yeah, yeah. You got to be careful because like then people will want to read that, and you don't want to give too much away because you want there to still be mystery. I think Team Eco had the perfect balance for like a video game, and letting the lore theorists go absolutely insane, because video gamers like to do that sort of thing. We're crazy. I will say, it's interesting. There's a sort of juxtaposition between like Dorman being good or evil. The Colossi seem nice and practically defenseless, and you're there murdering them, but it's also necessary to kill them so that Dorman can come back, and he's the one telling you to do so. It's a really beautiful landscape, but it's called the Forbidden Lands, and there's like a cursed air about it because there's no people at all anywhere. There's only the vague notion of people in the old ruined structures that are only inhabited by like lizards and the colossi. You feel like you should think that this place is like evil or whatever, but it's so beautiful. And again, like if anything, part of the draw for me is the fact that there aren't a ton of people and it's not like a city and it's not like there's 1,000 things to do. There's no hustle and bustle.
I don't even think there's like birds. Like I think literally it's just
Oh yeah,
lizards.
yeah. No, like it's that's another part of the uncanny air about it is like there's not really wildlife to speak of for the most part. There's plenty of vegetation, but like you don't hear birds. You don't see like deer in the forest. You don't. There's just nothing, and it's probably because it's like this cursed land. But at the same time, there's just something eerily beautiful about it, and I think that's neat.
That could be something that you could strive for, like in your own writings, if you're able to capture that feeling. Like maybe the characters could realize that there's really nothing alive, with the exception of like the vegetation. But like you could elicit a similar feeling in the characters and then also the readers, of course. But again, you just have to know how to execute it.
I think I've even seen a similar thing happen in books sometimes where it's like the character will stop and be like, wait a minute, what do you hear? And they're like, oh, nothing. And it's like, exactly. No birds, no, you know, pitter patter of like squirrels or other like bugs or anything. Like that can be like a scary thing, or it could just be a somewhat unnerving thing like it is in this game. It's whatever you want it to be, but like I've seen that used to good effect before.
I'd be relieved if there were no bugs, but if they could all just die.
But yeah, that's most of everything I have to say about it. If I wanted to get more into the gameplay of it, as like a gamer, I would have a lot more to say about it. It just so happens that the story is not wildly complicated, so having gone on for like 45 minutes is honestly somewhat impressive considering. But yeah, it's very neat. I highly recommend, if you do play games, to play this game yourself. Even if you have watched up to this point, it's well worth the play. Again, just for the immaculate vibes. And I would heartily recommend any of Team Eco's other games, which I'm only aware of two other ones. Eco for like PS1, which is a hard it's hard to get your hands on, but I think there's like a remaster collection you can get for PS3 or PS4. And The Last Guardian, which is widely available on any of the newest consoles, PS4, PS5. And that one might honestly be my favorite. Controversially, people really love Shadow of the Colossus, and they were very annoyed by one of the characters in The Last Guardian, but I like it and I recommend it. But yeah, really good story, really simple story, really effective story. Any other thoughts you had?
I would just say, just like, kind of a rundown of, writing tips, what we more or less discussed, if I just condense it in a nutshell. In this case, this game is a great example of having a very simple storyline, but having a lot of intrigue for, in this case, if it were a story format and not just a video game, it'd be great. It's just great for just having a lot of intrigue for the readers specifically. Have them question, or rather having the characters question, maybe their own morals, what their motive is, what the ending goal is going to be. You can really, subvert expectations by having, that twist ending and having an ambiguous antagonist with, what was his name again? Dorman. Having an ambiguous antagonist in that case. I would also say world building, because even though it's a very simple world, the Forbidden Lands, it's just very interesting. Just an interesting setup overall.
Yeah, there's lots of ruins. It makes you ask a lot of questions.
I
and
love
of course, it's called the Forbidden Lands, so you're like, what does that mean?
Yeah. And so there's, again, a lot of intrigue there. I think that's all my points there. That's like 6 points. But, it would make for an interesting story to read, I personally think. Again, just know how to execute it properly. But I think those are like the takeaways that you could, as a writer, learn from this game and kind of move forward from there. And that's why I like to cover video game plots and characters as well, because
they're just as good as other mediums.
Yeah, you can learn a lot, just from observing, how they, have a story unfold, what the characters' motives might be, or whatever. You can learn a lot there as well. Obviously, reading books is probably one of the best ways to learn as a writer, but you can learn from other mediums as well.
Yeah, and like book writing isn't the only kind of writing there is. There's also video game writing. They didn't just come up with that out of thin air.
Yeah, they needed writers to.
And there's also movie writing, so screenplays and whatnot. If you find yourself only interested in film, you can still be a writer. And one final note, if you are going to make a story similar to Shadow of the Colossus, I cannot stress this enough, make those vibes immaculate.
Or throw the whole thing out.
Just get rid of it. I've been Michael.
And I've been Deanna.
And is your underwear clean? You should probably wash those. Bye.
Thank you. Bye. How to do that? Give me a second.
Just like put elevator music there.
I realized earlier when I was like smiling all at the camera, I was looking in the wrong corner.
I haven't really been looking at the camera.